The name is John McDougall and it's spelled John McDougall. Not doctor.
What's that? MD.
Yeah.
For the transcribers.
Hey, Jeff Nelson, thanks for tuning in. Today I want to talk about Dr. John McDougall, who was incredibly important in my life and in the lives of my family. Things can be confusing in life, especially regarding your health, and John McDougall could unravel the mystery of health and give you the very best of advice. With John as your doctor, you didn't need a second opinion, you just kind of only needed his opinion. And after John died, I've had people come to me and they say, who's going to step in? Who's going to take over and take this information forward? Who's going to be the next John McDougall? But there is no next John McDougall. John wasn't the next Walter Kempner. He wasn't the next Dennis Burkitt. He was John McDougall. And he took information that other people had developed and he expanded on it. And others will do that as well going forward. So there's no next John McDougall. There are other people who he inspired or who he will inspire. And, they have to be their own person. No one can step into the shoes of John McDougall. What I care about is that we lost a really compassionate, caring, and wonderful person. I don't think my family will have a doctor and a friend like that again. Who else would care about us as much as John did? Having John McDougall in your life was like being blessed with a super smart family member. And you can't replace a family member. No one is going to step into that person's position. That's not going to happen. But hopefully we can find someone like John. But I really don't think that's even likely. Anybody can read a book or study and spout off words and knowledge, but not everyone can have the heart behind it that John did. For example, in one of many examples I could give, in 2015, my wife Sabrina had a pretty serious accident. She went on a bike ride one afternoon, and about 10 minutes into it, she called me, and I answered, but there was no one there. And I was saying, Sabrina, hello, are you there? Can you hear me? A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Sabrina. I answered again, but again, there was nothing. And I was saying, hello. I said, text me. Let's text, because the cell phone service was bad at that time. So I texted her, what's up? And she texted me back, she's had an accident. And I texted back, who has? And the text came back, the person whose phone this is. And that's when I realized that Sabrina had been hurt. She'd been run over by a truck while riding her bike. And someone had picked up her phone and tried to call me, but the Bluetooth in her phone was connected to her earpiece, to Sabrina's earpiece, and it had fallen out of Sabrina's ear. So I couldn't hear the person calling. They couldn't hear me. Anyway, I drove down to where she was. They took her to the hospital. She'd been very badly injured, and all of the skin on her calf had been completely stripped away. That night she had surgery, and I spent the night at the hospital. The next morning my kids stayed with her while I ran home to take a shower and change clothes. And I decided to put out a quick newsletter to say that Sabrina had been in an accident and seriously hurt, but she was going to be okay, just to let our VegSource community here know. And about 10 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was John McDougall. And he'd gotten the email. He asked about Sabrina, and he asked, could I speak with her? And I said, well, sure, she's kind of doped up, but when I get back to the hospital, I'll call you and you can talk to her. So I called Dr. McDougall when I was back, and I handed the phone to Sabrina, and John asked Sabrina, how are you doing? And Sabrina said fine. And John said, no, I want you to tell me how you really feel. None of this I'm fine stuff. I understand that no one else can feel your pain. And so Sabrina described what she was going through in more detail, and John had a serious accident himself several months earlier that year. He'd fallen and broken some bones and had a really rough time, and it took him a while to come back from that. And so John started telling Sabrina what her recovery was going to be like, that, first this is going to happen, then after a month it's going to be like that, 8 weeks in, you're going to be here. And it was sort of like, you're going to be feeling like it's a setback, but don't worry. And he went through what I guess I would call the stages of recovery. And I think his purpose was to give Sabrina hope, to make her feel, make her understand that it might not always be a straight line, that you go through this, you might hit a setback, but you just continue. What choice do you have? Then he talked to Sabrina about his own fall and injury that he'd gone through and how he felt and how he suffered from that, and mentally what that was like for him coming back from that. It was a real struggle. And I think for Sabrina, it was healing to hear this, to have a doctor kind of reveal his own personal feelings like that, because doctors, they're taught, they're hardwired to, keep a poker face, keep a blank face, keep it professional, and not to expose their own humanity. But McDougall, when he was talking to Sabrina, he did the opposite. And his opening up to her like that, I think it helped her a lot in a way she didn't expect. So John telling her, okay, this is going to happen, then that's going to happen, it gave Sabrina some hope in what was a, borderline hopeless situation that she had found herself in. John went on to call Sabrina every day while she was in the hospital, which was about 2.5 weeks, and she had to have 5 surgeries. John called every day, and he'd do a sort of perfunctory check-in on her treatment. What are they doing? What are they recommending? What are they giving you? But what he really wanted was to see where Sabrina was in her head, and then to be encouraging. And there were things where, the doctors might have recommended something that we didn't really understand. And Sabrina could ask Dr. McDougall, hey, they wanted to give her a transfusion because she'd lost a lot of blood. They wanted to give her an IV of iron because her iron was low. And so she would ask John, and he was like, no, I don't think you want to do that. Or he was, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And it's incredibly reassuring when you don't know, when you're in the hospital, when you have someone with John's knowledge, and because we trust him and his judgment, to know, when to say yes or no to what the hospital was pushing. A few months later, we put on our annual Health Expo, our conference where we bring in lots of vegan doctors and experts. And because John had been injured, he had turned down his speaking schedule that year. He wasn't doing any appearances. And so he said that he could be at our event via Zoom, but that he just wasn't traveling to speak anywhere yet. It's a 3-day conference that we put on, and we always had John speak on Sundays because when John was speaking on whatever day that was, we get an extra maybe 100 people who would show up just to hear John speak. So he was like our anchor for the weekend. For 20 years, he was always the last speaker. So on that Saturday of the event, John called me and he said, you know what? I'm going to fly to Los Angeles tomorrow and I'm going to attend your conference in person. But the only reason I'm doing this is to see Sabrina. So he and Mary flew down the next morning. They got to the hotel around 10 or 11. I got them a room in the hotel. And then John came down and he got Sabrina and took her upstairs with them. And they hung out for 90 minutes or a couple of hours. Then they had lunch. And then John gave his talk to the full event. And, a lot of people at the conference here would really want to meet and talk to John McDougall. But it was clear he was there just to spend some private time with Sabrina. This is the kind of person John McDougall was. He made you feel like, you're the most special one. You're his favorite. And I mean, that's a pretty nice thing. You're putting on this big event and you're getting a call from the great John McDougall that, hey, I'm flying down tomorrow. I'm doing this for Sabrina personally and not for all those other people who are going to be delighted to see Dr. McDougall in person, but he's there for you. And, he wasn't there as a doctor to check her progress. It was a personal visit about family stuff. He was always interested in our kids. It wasn't about veganism. It was about life. John was a friend. He was a special person. And as a doctor, it's kind of what you fantasize about. The old-time doctors, like in the movies where they show up at your house with their little, bag to save the day and everyone adores the family doctor. And when that doctor goes away or retires, no one trusts the new doctor because he's not going to be as good. It's like that archetype of the person who's just, kind of always there to care for you. And I think John did this for a lot of people. He had a lot of friends. And just, regular people. It wasn't like he was doing something special for a celebrity patient, to whom he gave extra special attention, although he had that as well. John was not a name dropper doctor. He wasn't one of those celebrity doctors who likes to brag and, about his famous clients. And you would find out maybe in a sideways manner that he had a famous patient who loved him. I was once interviewing John with my son was there operating one of the cameras, and my son said, hey, I like your tie. And Dr. McDougall looked at it. This is the tie when we interviewed him. And John said, oh, yeah, Jerry Garcia gave it to me. And then you go, Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead? And John, he said,
Mary and I used to take care of the whole group.
really?
Yeah, they were our patients. And one day when Heather was about your age, we took her and about 4 of her girlfriends to a Grateful Dead concert. And we watched the concert on stage about as far as you and I are from Jerry Garcia. One of the young girls was so overwhelmed she wouldn't come on stage. I mean, once in a lifetime opportunity, to sit there on stage with Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead band. There's a screen right in front of us, so the audience couldn't see us, but we're sitting right there next to him. It was unbelievable.
So how did I meet John McDougall? Well, I first met John about 28 years ago. How that happened was that Sabrina and I had read a book called Diet for a New America in 1990 by John Robbins, and then we went vegetarian after reading that book. Then one day, about 5 years later, in 1995, Sabrina's ears became highly inflamed and painful. After bouncing around to different doctors, she landed in the offices of a rheumatologist who diagnosed her with an autoimmune disease called relapsing polychondritis. Relapsing polychondritis is where your body attacks your cartilage. It's progressive and it destroys basically your ears, then your nose, your neck, around your heart, anywhere that you have cartilage, and it doesn't grow back. So she had this condition for maybe a year, and each time she had a relapse, she had to go on bed rest and take steroids and some powerful drugs. Someone had given Sabrina a book for Christmas called the McDougall Program, and she thought it was like a recipe book, so she didn't really look at it, but she read it maybe 9 months later when she was having a relapse. And Dr. McDougall talks about lupus and diet in the book, and relapsing polychondritis is in the lupus family. So long story short, Sabrina decided to follow Dr. McDougall's diet, and it very quickly put her relapsing polychondritis into remission. This is a disease that has a 45% mortality rate in 10 years. And those are probably a pretty bad 10 years. It was an awful year when she was sick. So we didn't know this until later when we saw a study about it on WebMD, and this is a very serious disease and fatal at least half of the time. So we felt Sabrina had dodged a bullet. We had small kids who could have lost their mom. But thanks to the information from John, Sabrina arrested the disease, and she's been fine ever since, except where, trucks and bicycles are concerned, I guess. But the rheumatologist really wasn't that surprised. He said, this can happen with certain autoimmune diseases. Diet can play a big role, but that most people don't want to have to change their diet. They want a pill or they want a treatment. And Sabrina thought, wow, I would have eaten cardboard to get rid of this disease. So she'd suffered for a year before finding Dr. McDougall. This was in the early days of the internet, and when we got on the internet, we found very little about the vegan diet and health, or very little about diet and health in general. So we made a website, vegsource.com, and dedicated it to John and Mary McDougall, as well as to John Robbins. The website was our form of kitchen activism. We had been blessed to get this information. We felt it had saved Sabrina, and we wanted to try and help spread the word. We contacted people and authors who were, working to spread the many good reasons to go plant-based. I found that Dr. McDougall had a very small website of just a few pages, and so I contacted him, I emailed him, and then I got to speak to him on the phone to thank him for helping Sabrina, and I offered to host his website for free and have a redesign done by a web designer who worked for us, and make some discussion boards for McDougallers to find each other and provide moderation and so on. We wanted to help him grow his web presence, and John said, hey, that would be great. So this is the first iteration of what we did for John in redoing his website way back then. And then we did this for everyone who wanted any help. We made the first website for PCRM, for Farm Sanctuary. I remember we did one called factoryfarming.com, for EarthSafe, for Michael Greger, Michael Clapper, for scores of vegan doctors and organizations. Then in 2001, we decided to have a party at a restaurant near our house to celebrate our 5-year anniversary of VegSource, and we put up a contact form for people to sign. Within a week or two, we had way more people sign up than we could fit in the restaurant, so we decided to do it in a hotel. And instead of just a Friday night dinner, we decided to add Saturday as a full day, and we asked friends from the plant-based world to come and speak. So John McDougall agreed to fly down, along with Colin Campbell, John Robbins, Howard Lyman, Robert Cohen, the Not Milkman. They all came in, and this was just before 9/11, the 9/11 attack. In fact, that happened. Our event was 2 weeks after. Only 2 people ended up dropping out, 2 people from Boston, but no one else dropped out. And we were the only event in the hotel that didn't get canceled that month, so the hotel was thrilled that we would be there. I remember setting up Friday afternoon and people were checking in at the hotel and saying hi to us in the lobby. And we found out that people had flown in from Japan and Germany and other countries to come to our little veg source celebration. They hadn't even bought a ticket yet. They just flew to California to attend, and we were kind of shocked. Everyone gave a dynamite talk, especially Dr. McDougall.
They looked at patients. These were diabetics, people with insulin resistance, normal, quote, normal people. And they fed them this high carbohydrate diet. They exercised them, and they cut their insulin levels in half. I tell you, cut insulin levels. If insulin's your focus, and it shouldn't be. It should be just good health. They also cut the triglycerides in half. They also dropped the cholesterol. People lost weight. They got healthy.
Most people who know John, they know his story, that as a young doctor, he worked on a sugar plantation in Hawaii, the Dole Plantation, and he was the doctor for all the employees and their families. It's like over 1,000 people. And he observed that his old patients who had come from China or the Philippines, they continued to eat the way that they'd eaten in the old country, and they were very healthy.
So I had a chance to observe these 3 generations of people. The first generation, living on rice primarily and vegetables, very little meat, no dairy, were always trim. They had no breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, no diabetes, no heart disease, active into their 80s and 90s. Their kids, who gave up some of this starch and vegetable eating, went into more of the animal products, more of the rich foods. They got a little fatter, a little sicker, and the grandkids were just as fat and just as sick as anybody that I'd ever taken care of. So that was my introduction. That taught me that what I'd originally learned as an unhealthy diet, a diet without meat and dairy, was not true, because my healthiest people did not eat diets centered on meat and dairy. They ate diets centered on starch. And it also taught me that it wasn't inevitable that as you get older, you get fatter and sicker, because these people didn't. They maintained their good health and their activity into old age. It was because of their diet.
John told me on one occasion that the observation that his older patients were much healthier and that the reason was their diet was, because of the food they were eating. John said that that wasn't his observation. He didn't figure that out himself, but he had a friend in Hawaii, a kind of hippie guy who had moved there to surf and probably, smoke weed and have a great time. John said that that friend of his was who had suggested to him that maybe the difference was the food, that the food was the cause of good or bad health. He mentioned the guy's name. I don't remember the name, but this is John's greatest epiphany, basically, early on. And he was telling me that someone else came up with it. He didn't want to take the credit for what some surfing dude, hippie friend had told him. And he was telling me that this friend actually, deserved credit, this other guy. So John McDougall did not want to play the ego games. He was an honest guy, comfortable in his skin. He didn't need to get credit. He just told it like it is. And even when he was attacked from time to time by some in the plant-based community, he just let it roll off him. Even though he was right, he didn't really try to defend himself. He didn't need to. And for him, how I think he saw it was that when another plant-based doctor attacked him or his work, it was like, okay, you're carrying part of the message. We're carrying a very similar message. I don't have to get into it with you. He felt that, we're on the same team. And the truth is, he was on their team, but they weren't on his team. That was the difference. McDougall was the biggest guy in the room with the best information, and maybe some other doctors seemed to resent that. And maybe they were all on the same team of wanting to get people healthier and encourage them to improve their diet. But he was not on the same team of, I want to sell you crap for your supplement cabinet. I want to sell you the McDougall DHA or the McDougall super secret nutrient potion or whatever. Right now I'm thinking of the old joke, a doctor dies and goes to heaven. He meets God and God says, do you know what the difference is between a doctor and me? And the doctor says, what? And God says, I never thought I was a doctor. Okay, my mother went to Dr. McDougall, did his program in the 90s back when it was at St. Helena, and she cleared up a bad chronic skin condition on her legs. They thought it was from chlorine because she was always swimming 2 or 3 times a week and always going to the dermatologist. And suddenly she didn't need a dermatologist anymore. It cleared up. It never came back as long as she avoided dairy. So I brought up my mother to John over the years, and he would always remember her and every detail about her and my dad. And because unlike most doctors, where you spend a couple of hours in a waiting room maybe, and then you get in to see them for 5 minutes, and the doctor is so busy he's barely even looking at you while he writes your prescription. John actually knew his patients and cared about everyone. So when I would mention my mom, John would always ask about her and, how is she? How are they? How's dad? Another thing, Dr. McDougall saw very clearly through pharmaceutical nonsense. Starting in the 1980s and the 90s, he saw how the drug and food industries began to take over science, how studies could be designed to achieve any outcome that these companies wanted, and that doctors had to be very careful not to be pushing propaganda and dangerous nonsense, which happened way too often.
And money will buy almost anything. Scientists are clever. They'll figure the proper design to show the results. And that's the unfortunate thing. It used to not be that way. It used to not be that heavy influence of industry on our research. But now I can't trust anything. I honestly can't. If you take the drug, the risk is reduced by 9 fractures in 10,000 women. That's less than 1 in 1,000 women taking this drug for 3 years. Now, would you buy this drug if you were told the absolute benefit? Absolutely not. But you're lied to. Your doctors are taught to lie to you. The absolute risk of fracture reduction in 4 years is 1.7%. But you know what happens by 7 years? Fracture risk is increased when you take these drugs. But they don't report the 7-year data to the FDA or to anybody else.
It's dangerous to look for problems that will never surface, but they'll become problems if you look for them. If you examine 2,000 men with PSAs, you'll save 1 life, maybe. But you'll diagnose 48 men with prostate cancer that had never known they had it. Yet they will lose their prostate, they'll pee in their pants, and they won't be able to get an erection. This is dangerous looking for problems that don't exist. When your body is sick, you will know, and then you seek medical attention. Annual physical examinations are recommended against getting by every authority that I know. Don't do it. Stay away from physicians. For heart disease and diabetes and colon cancer and breast cancer, if you want to get out of that business, you have to fix the problem. You do not want physicians as your best friends. You don't want your calendar littered with doctor's appointments. You think doctors work for free? They're in business. So you better go in as a well-informed customer, because you'll be at mercy to them if you don't take that attitude. You ought to go into them like they were used car salesmen. That's about as much respect as they're owed, as used car salesmen. They're going to trick you every time they get a chance. And maybe not intentionally. Maybe they're all well-intentioned. Let's just assume they are. But the amount of misinformation that goes on because of money, because of research paid by the food industries and research paid for 70% of the research that I read in my journals has a funding by an industry. 70%. So this is the stuff that's happening in your doctor's office. This is what's going through your dietitian's mind. Is propaganda from industry. It's just business. It's not a conspiracy, folks. They're not out to get you. They're out to make money.
My father had heart problems in his 70s, and at one point he had a scare, and he went to the hospital, and they put some stents in, and he realized that he needed to start following John McDougall. So he did that, and he improved a lot. His numbers came way down, and he was doing very well. Over the following years, though, he kind of loosened his diet. He thought he'd figured it out. He stopped being as strict as he had been. In fact, he would sometimes have fried calamari. Basically, he fell off the wagon. And he ended up having a massive heart attack. Fortunately, he'd had chest pains just before this, so he was in the hospital when the heart attack hit, and they were able to save him. It was a widowmaker, the one that almost always kills you. And then my dad, he found vegan religion. He got out of the hospital. My parents hired a cook, and everything they ate came from the McDougall or the Esselstyn cookbooks. He lived another 8 years, and he got rid of his heart problems. He was hospitalized a few times during that period for intestinal blockages, and they would usually pass after a couple of days, and then he'd be released and home again. This one time he was in the hospital, I remember, for a few days, and when the blockage passed, he was told he could go home. And as we were packing stuff in his hospital room to leave, another doctor came in from radiology and said, not so fast. Apparently they had seen something suspicious on his x-ray and decided that he needed to have some kind of scan done. Fortunately, the hospital owned these scan machines, so they were going to come up and get him in the next hour or two, but, don't leave. So my dad was upset. He said, I think I'm ready to leave now. I mean, what would you even do if you found something? I'm 92 years old. What, are you going to operate on me? Someone my age? And the doctor said that, yeah, they might if he had something, that they had operated on a 95-year-old woman just the previous year who had some kind of polyps in her colon, and the operation was a success. And my dad said, is she still alive? And the doctor said, well, she died about 6 months after the surgery, but she had the cleanest colon of any 95-year-old. So I asked my dad, do you want me to call John McDougall? Do you want to talk to Dr. McDougall? And my dad said, yes, please do. So I dialed John, he picked up, and I explained my dad had been, in the hospital for a blockage. It had cleared. They were discharging him, but a radiologist said there was a suspicious shadow on an x-ray, so they wanted him to stay and do some scans. And McDougall said, and I'll never forget this, he said, oh, for Christ's sake, tell them to go fuck themselves. And I said, John, can you talk to my dad? And I handed the phone to my father, and Dad spoke to John for a few minutes, and I could hear my dad laughed, and they, and nodded. And then he hung up and he said to the doctors, thanks, but I'm going to be leaving now. My dad lived a few more years. He died of post-polio syndrome. He'd had polio in the 1950s, but he didn't die of heart disease. He didn't die of cancer. And I think John's whole thing in his phone call with my dad had been, don't let them scare you. Tell them to go fuck themselves. John was fearless. Then there was what John McDougall did for my daughters, Nina and Randa. When they were 20, they both developed severe cystic acne, and they went to the dermatologist, and they went to other dermatologists. Nothing helped. It got worse and worse. And they basically became hermits. They didn't even want to leave the house. During a summer trip that we took to Northern California to visit my parents, they were, as usual, complaining about their acne. And I said, have you ever read what Dr. McDougall says about acne? So they found it on their phones and read about on his website the importance of avoiding nuts and avocados and olives and oils and other overt fats. That going very low fat was the key, was really important when it came to acne. One of my daughters said, Dr. McDougall saved you, Mom. Maybe he can save us. So they committed to following Dr. McDougall's advice and changed their diets and began improving very quickly. They were having no new breakouts, and within a month or two, much of their acne had gone way down. They made some videos about it on YouTube, and one of them went viral, one of the videos, and this led to articles in the Daily Mail and other outlets, and ultimately a book deal for the girls. And Dr. McDougall was so helpful in reading through and offering corrections, and he wrote the foreword for the book. So I can't think of a member of my family that Dr. McDougall hasn't helped at one point or another. And I didn't mention that Sabrina, when she had cured her relapsing polychondritis through Dr. McDougall's dietary help, she went out and bought the name of the disease as a URL, relapsingpolychondritis.com. And she put up her story, and she put up a video that she'd done with Dr. McDougall when he had interviewed her on his TV show. And over the years, probably hundreds of people with this disease, relapsing polychondritis, have contacted Sabrina after finding her website and reporting that they'd also changed their diet and put their own relapsing polychondritis into remission, or dramatically improved their health, or gotten rid of their asthma. She's gotten so many emails over the years. We put on a VegSource event in Hawaii 10 or 12 years back, and we took people over there, and one couple had signed up, and they were coming in from the East Coast, and they wanted to come in a few days early before the event so that they could, adjust to the time zone. So we picked them up at the airport to drive them back to the hotel when they arrived, and we didn't know them. They'd never been to our conferences or events. And I asked, what made you decide to, go on our trip? And the wife said, I wanted to meet the woman who saved my life. And she went on to say she meant Sabrina, that she had found Sabrina's website, that she had relapsing polychondritis, and that she herself, had gone on Sabrina's diet, on her advice, McDougall's diet basically, and that had gone into full remission. She got her life back. She got off all those drugs. And she wanted to thank Sabrina for putting up that website and saving her life. And that's why they had come on this trip. And just to hear that, it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up hearing this. So you never know who you might be impacting when you try to put helpful information out into the universe. And it made me think about when Dr. McDougall had called Sabrina after her bike accident and said that no one else can feel your pain. You have to talk about it for people to know that John was about empathy. That's what he taught. And when Sabrina made that website, relapsingpolychondritis.com, she was sharing what she learned from John McDougall. And that woman got cured by the information from McDougall that Sabrina had used. And it was like a stone, thrown in a lake, and the waves radiate out in all directions. And we were just one of the waves from John McDougall. We were able to help people because John had helped us.
I think the most important thing for people to understand is they have an opportunity, once they have information, they have an opportunity to have a much, much better life. And I think what you should do is you should worry about yourself and your family and your immediate friends. And you should share this message with everybody that you can share it with that you care about. And I think if each and every one of us did that, instead of worrying about the whole world, we just worried about those people we love around us and really made the effort to communicate and to help them change, that there are enough people that will learn this message that will change the whole world.
If you want to honor John McDougall and carry on his work as I do, then I think a way to do this is to listen to people, to care, to make everyone in your life feel important, and if you learned anything from John, to pass it on to other people. Now, did John McDougall, did he want an anointed person, a chosen one, to keep his work going? I don't know, maybe yes, but to me, I think he didn't want one disciple, but that everyone he came in contact with could go out and help others, not just one person. I'm going to be doing more videos touching on Dr. McDougall, and they may not be on YouTube, so I invite you to subscribe to my newsletter, which is linked in the description, so that you'll get an alert when I post that new video, even if it's not on YouTube. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and thank you to John McDougall for your dedication to improving the lives of so many people, for your compassion and caring that touched so many individuals and families, including mine, and for being a beacon of kindness in a world that desperately needed your voice. Your legacy will continue to inspire and heal for many generations to come.